Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today for the Connectiv Digital Media and Audience Marketing Council meeting. I am Matt Kinsman at Connectiv. We've got a great presentation here today on customer experience and really driving customer experience thinking and strategy throughout your organization, as well as some UX trends that you need to be aware of in 2019. We're also going to follow up with a conversation around migrating ad servers, and we certainly hope you stick around for that as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our chair, Roberta Muller.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining. It's February. It's nice out in the New York area. Thank God it's not like below 60 like it was in Chicago area last week. So if you're like North Star, and you work on the development team or the product team, you basically live your life rotating around website redesigns. And after a while, it gets a little taxing. I find sometimes some of the problems in organizations are the business is so visually focused that sometimes it's hard to get them to actually focus on the user journey. And I think the important and critical prep work you really should be doing before you even start to, open up Photoshop or do any form of design, right? There's a 7-second rate that you have to grab someone's attention and move them through, whether it's the purchase process or the reading process or the searching process. And it's so critical to get that nailed down correctly the first time before you start investing money and time and effort on kind of rebuilding and redesigning your websites. And we've lived through our share of pain with that at North Star. So hopefully this is going to be, and I think it is, it's going to be a great session for you. We've got two different companies here to kind of share their wisdom, talk a little bit about the strategy, things to focus on, how they involve themselves with the process with customers at the end of the day. And hopefully I think we should all be able to take away from this things to really consider before we start that journey on kind of ripping apart a product and kind of redesigning a product. I think there will be some really great learning opportunities for us on the phone today. So with that, I actually, if you want to flip the slide for a second, we've got Jason and Brian here from Inzovu. Did I say that correctly?
Close. Inzovu. Very close.
Inzovu. Okay, great. We're going to talk to them first, and then after that we're going to follow up with Square Stack Circle, which I just think is an awesome idea too. So I'm going to put myself on mute now for a couple minutes, and please remember, share your questions, type them into the box, unmute yourself, and chime in if you want to make a comment, because I think the more interactive it is, I just think it's the more people get out of it. So with that, go ahead, Jason and Brian.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Matt, are you going to be advancing slides? I don't know where I...
Yes, I will.
Okay, great. So I'll just kind of cue you up. Well, thank you very much, everybody. If you want to advance to the next slide, that'd be great. We like to say Marajo. This is Jason speaking, by the way. You'll hear Brian chime in as we share some perspectives, some insights, and just kind of our view of the world. Marajo is Kinyarwanda for hello, so Marajo to everyone. I want to just kind of quickly acknowledge a couple things as we get started. We're just briefly going to tell you a little bit about who we are, what we do, in connection to Square Stack, which is how we've got connected to all this really wonderful conversation. Excited to hear from everyone and some of the questions today. And we're going to, as I mentioned, share some stories, some insight about what we see and how we see things as designers, strategists, researchers, and then talk a little bit about design as strategy. And then, we're going to move through those pieces of or points pretty quickly. We're happy to share the slides afterwards, that thing. But what we also wanted to do was make sure that we got to questions, any burning questions and thoughts, and where we might be helpful in the conversation as you're thinking about the challenges that you face as an organization or as individuals or what have you. I think Roberta hit on a couple of things of sometimes the pain and angst of yet another redesign, or how do we engage somebody using a website or a mobile app or something. So they're not clear and cut answers all the time. Every situation is different because of the context, but we'll do our best to see if we can't dig into some questions that people have. Next slide. Just quickly, who we are. Inzovu is a international design organization. We use design thinking to help solve and tackle social problems. What does that mean? That means that we work with startups, nonprofits, large corporate organizations, all sorts of different kinds of organizations. Truthfully, we kind of nerd out in that way because we feel like it gives us an opportunity to learn a lot about different business models, different business challenges, and all that insight that's gathered up, we apply in a variety of situations. And where we see the world as designers is that everything is inherently social. I don't use this term as a kind of social good, social impact, although there are those sorts of things. Really we're thinking about designing for human beings, for people, whether that's consuming and reading content or whether that is helping to solve and support a task. And so we've worked with a number of different types of organizations internationally. You go to the next slide. At the core of what we do is experience design. So everything from kind of helping an understanding around challenges for organizations and setting them up for success, all the way through to the detailed level of what is the thing that we're designing and building together. And we train and teach and speak and all that sort of fun stuff we love to share. Next slide. And here's our logo parade. We're not going to spend time on that. Again, if you have questions or thoughts or that sort of thing, happy to chat after. Okay. The other thing I wanted to make mention is how we came to this, which is SquareStack. We have a phenomenal relationship with SquareStack as we're helping to get their platform, their product, off the ground. And one of the things that we do, especially with startups, is that we'll embed and partner with them in a variety of different ways. However, we use design thinking to help think about how we create as much value as possible for the platform, for the organization, and for the people that we're designing for. And in this case, SquareStack is a platform for small business owners to help them come to terms with their technology, their apps, and begin to consolidate that into a singular place to make access to them easier, to make management of the insights and data points that those apps that they subscribe to or use to manage and run their business, from marketing through to inventory through to all sorts of kinds of different things. And we've been working with them for the last year and a half in helping to both optimize what they've got going on now in partnership with a number of different channel partners, but also in terms of helping to envision the future of the experience. And so we'll add in some color commentary along the way as we share some of these stories. One of the bigger things that we were asked to do is share some of the trends around user experience. As Brian and I were thinking about this, what we thought was critically important is just give you a little bit of a backstory, and probably the most important trend here, you may have already experienced some of this in your organization or are experiencing it, is this digital transformation, this evolution, right? And so it's been 20 plus years or 30 years, whatever view of the world you have. And the number one trend that we hope to impart upon you is the value and importance of design thinking, of experience design. We're not too hung up on labels, but really about using design as a capability to help drive businesses forward. And I say that broadly, not as just a pixel on a screen or a website or a landing page or something. I mean in totality. This is the #1 trend that we can impart upon you. This is how and where innovation comes from. This is how and where organizations move themselves and their business models and the experiences forward. So if you take one thing away from that is how do we raise the bar and level of design, and how and where we apply it as a creative problem-solving process, or as an opportunity identification, or even use it to help innovate. And so it's helpful to think about where we've kind of been from, and you probably can think about this journey over the course of time. Next slide. And it's really becoming systemic inside an organization. And along this time, in our world, a term called user experience, or UX, was born. I will want to make sure that this is clear, because user experience is not a pixel on a screen. It is not an interface. User experience is a mindset. It is a way of approaching, solving a problem, addressing a need. And it is made up of multiple disciplines. And that's really important. And it's the combination of those disciplines that, when gel together, allow us to get at designing for the experience. Next slide. There is a distinction that Brian and I like to make between user experience, UX, and customer experience. User experience, while it's this mindset, this multidisciplinary approach, as I mentioned, that you might take around designing for a product or service experience for a customer, customer experience is in the total experience and set of interactions that someone has with your brand along an entire journey. It is how the mobile app makes me think, act, and feel, to the website and how they complement each other. It's how Sally or Jim personally interact with me in a conversation. It's all of that. That is what customer experience is. And at best, you can help positively influence it in our perspective. Next slide. And so user experience and design thinking can all help with many of these types of challenges. It helps not only with customers, but also internally to create change. Design, and one of the bigger trends here that we're seeing over the last couple of years and where we get involved, is design and the success of implementing a design, say a website redesign, say a mobile app, whatever. The sustainability, or the long-term view of its impact and success, is also based upon understanding your culture of the organizations and how you make decisions, so that you craft an approach that gels with that, and you don't force fit something. And that's how you get to long-term sustainability. There is a lot of change management in the design process to really ready an organization for innovation. Next slide. And so when you think about design, really is the rendering of intent, experiences that we have. And I think one of the other things we want to impart upon you as you think about a customer experience is that it's not just at the moment of them experiencing, consuming, reading, engaging, whatever they're doing with your product or service or content. It is what happens just before that, and it is what happens after as well. And that's really important. Next slide. Because all great experiences are designed, is what we know. You feel it when they're not, the frustration, the friction. Why can't this experience be like X? Next slide. And in many cases, we think about this. This is an example. I don't know where everyone's located. In Chicago, we've got grocery stores, one called Fresh Time. Fresh Time has addressed this problem of grocery shopping with your kids, perhaps when they're hungry, or perhaps maybe when you're hungry, and even recognizing the need that your son or daughter might have in terms of, I just got to get through the grocery list and get out of here, but man, they're starving. They've addressed the problem of satisfying that need, right? And so at the beginning of the shopping experience, they've kind of presented an opportunity for kids to have a fresh and healthy snack kind of curb those hunger pains. But also they do some fun things inside the store too, with some games and things of finding a tractor or what have you, right? So they've thought about the experience in a little bit of a different way that you might not always expect from a grocery store. This is just kind of an example when I talk about experience. Next slide. And so, what we see is that design as a capability really is a strategic, is strategy for an organization, especially at the level of infusing it across an organization, across what they do for supporting a customer experience. And it is not just knocking out visual design comps for a website, for a mobile app, or whatever. And that's really critical if you truly want to innovate. Next slide. You can see this if you are paying attention to any research analyst firms that talk about customer experience. This particular one from Megan Burns, who is a leader in Forrester's practice around customer experience, talks about the only way to get and keep high marks from customers is to treat customer experience as a business discipline. This is not just simply by gathering metrics, quantitative metrics. It's by gathering the qualitative. It's by iterating and truly committing to a process of iteration, of testing and learning, of trying and of experimenting and learning. Next slide. And it's through that process we get at a lot of different questions, like how can we understand and react to customers' needs, right? To create greater empathy inside of organizations. Next slide.
Hey Jason, real quick, I want to jump in on that one. Matt, if you can jump back to that last picture. This idea of instilling empathy, this is actually from an in-home research study that we did. This is actually a customer going through a process online with our client, and we captured this in the moment. When we talk about instilling empathy into the organization, you got to think about research, right? So doing the right kind of research, whether it's usability testing, doing interviews, things like that, gets you the data so you can start to understand people. Go ahead. Next slide, Matt.
Yeah. It also helps you start to identify the focus. Go ahead, Brian. Keep going.
Yeah. So once you get your data, you have to understand, like, where do you need to focus, where are you optimizing, right? So I don't know all of your individual issues, but through the right kind of research, a little bit of research, you can start to really focus. And so this was, this picture here is actually a project where we did a bunch of research and we wound up with like 1,000 Post-it notes of individual bits of data that we organized into a model to understand how people are thinking, right? This is a high-level, kind of very strategic project we were working on to develop a direction, a strategic direction. So it was through those kinds of interviews that we created this kind of data and then needed to make sense of it. All right, next slide. And so while you're thinking about all of this, you know, the brand is the experience, right? So when we talk about using different sites, apps and things, the experience you have across all of those those touch points, including like things like customer care, affect your brand. This picture, I did not take that one, so we just thought Apple was a good way of conveying brand. Next slide. And so this idea of, you know, having a customer-centric culture that kind of has embraced this idea of empathy, you know, understanding how and why people do the things that they do, is really, really important. So Jason and I talk about a way of being. So when you're thinking about your organizations and, you know, what are the trends, another trend that we've identified that I think we've been living for quite some time is the way of being as a designer or design-minded individual or organization. This here was a research study we did where we brought people in and we had a whole team of people from the client and our team actually sit down and listen to these sessions in real time. It takes a lot of time, but this creates a different kind of thinking and conversation within the organization. So we think that these types of activities, UX methods and models, all bring you to this kind of way of being. Okay, next slide. And so this stuff is pretty tough, right? There's very few kind of one size fits all, because every organization, while they may do the same thing, they may have different pressures, different objectives with customers. And so trying to figure it out is a challenge. Next slide. And the reason why this can be so challenging is that, as organizations grow, they tend to develop their own little silos, right, or territories that people have, and people kind of get intractable in their views of things. If you don't have your organization's goals and objectives aligned around experience design, the experience outcomes for the customer, that could also take you in the wrong direction. And just everyone not talking the same language, right? Especially if you bring in, any of you have brought in some user experience people or designers, you might see them kind of swimming upstream, right? Struggling against the trend, because there is a squishiness around design and UX and trying to figure this out, at least in the beginning, right? So that doesn't always fit with cultures organizations, which can make the transition really tough. Next slide. So one of the things we like to share is companies that are investing in design, right? And kind of these are all names that you're probably familiar with. Steelcase, the CEO from Steelcase recently just went over to Ford after a great career at Steelcase of bringing user-centered design into office furniture, right? It's kind of, at least when I first heard about it, it's like counterintuitive. A chair is a chair, but it's not, right? So how you move through an office space, the functionality of the furniture and things like that is really important. So now he's bringing that over to Ford, where they've kind of already been doing that. So that seems to be a really good fit there. Next slide. So what these organizations do, design is something that is part of their entire corporate culture, right? It's across the entire enterprise. It's strategic, right? It's not just a UX individual. There is leadership around design. There's executives that are focused on design. And for these organizations, design is a really big word, but design can also be just we're focusing on the website, right? It doesn't have to be the entire enterprise. You can start small. So the main thing with these organizations is that design is kind of a strategic part of what they do and think about every day. Next slide. So this survey that was done by the Design Management Institute back in 2015, I'm not sure, I think they've done one more since, but this was really interesting. Of these companies that make design and customer experience the core, or one of the core strategic efforts inside the organization, they outperform the S&P 500 by over 200%, right? So the proof's in the pudding there. When you focus on those kinds of things, you start to create experiences where customers want to come back and keep using your products. Okay, next slide. So, you're seeing many more organizations building in design capabilities. We've been hearing about this for a long time, but I think corporate America and larger organizations are really starting to catch on to this idea of it being part of your culture. Next slide. So when you think about a design-centric culture, you're focused on the experience that people are having. You're using models. Roberta mentioned a journey map in the very beginning. There's personas that you can create. Design offers you all kinds of frameworks and models to take really complex problems and distill them down into something that everyone can kind of understand and get that kind of shared understanding. Also experimenting, right? You need a culture where you kind of tolerate failure. You allow it to happen and you actually run towards it, because when you fail, you learn so much, especially when we're talking about even interaction design and all things digital.
Hey, Brian. The only thing I would add on that is, and this is more sometimes maybe Brian and I differ, is I don't there's lots of talk about agile and creating an MVP and lean user experience design, or whatever you want to call it. Tend to not get hung up in it, but you hear a lot about fail fast. And I really think that is hopefully a dying trend. this should be about how can we learn quickly. And that's a really important thing because that repositions the conversation you have within your organization, your stakeholders and decision makers of what they're investing in. They're investing in an approach and a process to learn faster so that you can become smarter and more nimble as an organization.
Yeah, this is Roberta, and I would just add that I find sometimes that's so much easier said than done because sometimes the smaller development teams can't keep up, right? So we're trying to get to a place quickly, right? Let's implement this prototype or this particular feature on a website. And I don't know if here sometimes we have some lag time with even getting that finally implemented and finished to kind of track and see the outcome. So I find sometimes that's just a frustration. It's just how do you really implement that type of quickness, right? That agility.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a growing pain, challenge, frustration for many organizations. It takes lots of different approaches and looking at what works best. I would say working with a variety of different types of clients, they all do it a little bit differently. Some, based upon how they budget and plan investment and spend, already have the entire year planned out. We just learned this thing, we can't fit it in, right? Or others, it's like we've got the year's budget planned out and we've got a process that we're going to move through and we're going to continue to adjust and reprioritize as we learn, right? There's never a clear-cut answer in terms of that you can apply to every single organization because really what it comes down to is the culture, the values, the way organizations make decisions. It's about being in tune with those so that you can design a process that helps to move them along to the place where they ought to be and not create be respective of the amount of chaos you're creating as you move.
Right.
All right, next slide. So this is a great quote that Jason and I love from a friend of ours, John Kolkel, who's written a lot about experience design. And, one of the things he focuses on is this idea of humanizing technology and developing emotionally resonant products, right? And so this is, to me, this is about simplicity. This is about listening deeply to what people are trying to do, why they're trying to do it. Because design is really an empathic type of activity, right? As John says here, it implicitly drives a more thoughtful human approach to business. And we feel those kinds of things when we come across them, right? Anytime you have an experience with an organization and it's like the commercial, that was easy, hit that easy button, right? That's how you want it to be. And people are not going to necessarily remember the interaction, the drop down was this. So they're going to remember how they felt leaving the experience with your organization. Okay, next slide. Another thing to think about in terms of culture is just, your designers, your UX professionals, this is a craft, right? And this is a craft from the most senior level individual, VP, whatever in your organization, down to the entry level kind of designer. And the way we look at this is, you start to hone that craft with kind of your tools, resource, and process. Just usability testing. How do you do usability testing? Do you do it the same way every time? Do you have something that you can kind of follow? Is it, do you plan it? Do you have some structure around artifacts to kind of guide that experience? And then what do your outputs look like? The next phase of establishing a point of view, this is where you've got the tools and process down, right? You know how to do all of those kinds of things. You're starting to create some models now, right? And taking out to the rest of the organization and gaining mind share. And then the last part for designers around maturity is that, they're at the strategy table, right? They're talking about kind of business outcomes instead of, interaction outcomes or app level or site level kind of outcomes. But how do we take design and this culture of design and make that a strategic advantage? And then next slide. So it's really all about taking this idea of your best business thinking in what you do, and investing in design with some great technology to create the kind of perfect marriage of where you get focus and a design-minded organization. And that's it. That's the end of the slides. One thing I'd like to mention before we get into questions is that a lot of the things that we talked about, we covered here, was high-level kind of strategy where we think design is in terms of a craft. But a lot of things we talk about, we apply with SquareStack with the work that we're doing there. So we're doing everything from basic usability testing to interviews to understand what small businesses might want, right? So we have our platform, there's a value to that, but we're also looking beyond that, right? So we're taking all of the models, the research approaches, and everything that we use everywhere else and applying it to a startup type of environment. And it doesn't really matter what size you're at. All of these things can apply as you look at kind of a larger organization or a bigger problem. The scale of the types of efforts and things you do can change, but it's all kind of basically the same foundational stuff. So with that, questions?
Yeah, no, I think the only thing I would say, and then I'd love to hear some questions and see how we can point you in a direction or provide examples through some of the work either that we're doing with SquareStack or others. The most important thing, as I mentioned at the top, is that while some of the things that we had mentioned were trends in the past, they are now very foundational in terms of how organizations are using design. And so regardless of last year's responsive, mobile first, whatever, these are things that I'd say are in flux. While they're this year's design of trying out more VR or AR inside of distributing or experiencing content. That's great. For some organizations, that'll work out. For some, it won't. In the long run, we don't know exactly how that'll all work out either. But what we do know, and what drives the ability to actually capitalize on many of those types of things, is leveraging design as a true capability inside of an organization and raising it up, not just only from a point of view of designing a digital thing, but raising the bar in terms of where it's positioned and how it's used in an organization so that you can begin to experiment and perhaps even capitalize on more of these types of digital focused trends or just in general experience trends. So we'd love to take questions. Matt, Roberta, I don't know if we've got a list brewing or going.
Just for our attendees, if you guys want to ask some questions, you can hit *7 to unmute your line. You can also type them in the Q&A tab, the lower left-hand corner. Just type in your question, hit send to all presenters, and we can address those questions as they come in.
Yeah, this is Roberta. I think, I liked the comment you just made on how you can use design to kind of maybe work on a single product per se, like VR or something, to incorporate that into your website for a short period of time. Do you find with some of your other customers that doing those kind of one-off things, are you then beginning to become more part of the product development process, and how you not only add that, how are you going to add that feature to your site, but how are you going to monetize that? Who is the audience? Is it the right product to begin with? Like, do you get into kind of those conversations?
Absolutely. That's where we typically start a lot of. Brian mentioned some research. Sometimes it's prototyping. Sometimes it's going out with a number of different questions. Sometimes it's taking a look at what's happening inside of the competition, or even more so, indirectly what's competing for people's time and what are their growing expectations in terms of the experience, the analog, right, to how they're experiencing your brand, your product or service. I would say, from a very tactical way of positioning what we do, is a lot of product and service design. Primarily it is digital, But how we apply that is pretty strategic at first, because it's important for us, and it should be important for any design partners that you have too. I will say that. And if it's not, you should be asking them these questions to recognize how this meshes with your business model, your business plan, your business strategy. You can go off and spend a lot of money on a VR or an AR or an XYZ or what beacons. It doesn't matter, right? However, if you're sinking a lot of capital investment into hardware or software, and then you're sinking money into services, and you're not having conversation about how this impacts the organization longer term, or what's required to think about this more sustainably, right? You're going to potentially wind up with you're raising the risk of a lot of waste, right? And so many times we get into conversations about like, hey, we can do that capability, that feature on the website, on an app, or something. You know what? If this works out and it works out well, or the indications of testing it so far is working out well, you're going to need a community manager. You're going to need somebody to make sure that they're on top of creating content or managing and moderating the community, or something, right? Or now that you've got a product, a digital product, you need to think about the process, the approach, the people to manage that over the long haul. And so that becomes a growth question for an organization about, are we going to rely on our external partner to continue to do that, or are we going to start to grow and model our team and capability to do that ourselves, right? And we help out in that regard as well many times for clients.
Great. Any other questions, or are we rolling into SquareStack now, I think? Matt?
Jason and Brian, they represent SquareStack as well.
Oh, as well. Okay. I thought it was going to, because I was looking at SquareStack last night, and I thought it was really super interesting. If on the phone, haven't looked at it yet. It's kind of a, I don't know, it's like a tool, one-stop shopping for smaller, mid-sized businesses to kind of get a real good status or health check on where they're at any given point in time. So I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit more about what's actually within that tool stack. Do you know what I mean? Or does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, and SquareStack, we're part of the SquareStack team. SquareStack is also part of our client, so it's an interesting an exciting relationship for us, quite honestly. It's the kind of relationship that speaks about how we partner with organizations, especially when it comes to startups, a bit of strategic advice, counsel, and also doing. And it's kind of how we position our organization to do that, kind of akin with a number of types of challenges. But SquareStack, at its current, we really see an opportunity to help support the small business community, to help them make sense of all the different apps that they're using to manage and run their business. And many of these small business folks that we're targeting are ones that have grown a successful business off the backs of their own personal brand, their own craft or ability, and over time have found themselves into a kind of a place of operating a business. And many times have not gone to business school, and so they're kind of like, what do I do now, right? And so technology plays a role in a lot of that in terms of helping them operate or gain answers or insights or do a thing or automate something. And so our first foray into a lot of this is to just kind of bring that into a central place. And so, whether they're using some sort of banking software and pull that in via an app and allow them a place to create a dashboard of what's happening with various processes, marketing, financial, operating processes, and insights for them. They can do that now with the dashboard. And as we continue to move into the future, we're looking at additional ways as we partner with various channel partners and different professional associations of how can we bring content and expertise to that, right? So additional relevance and context to help them become better business owners and create more durable, long-lasting businesses.
Great. All right.
Just one thing, guys. I'm hoping you can leave us with a couple specific suggestions, specifically around some tools that are on your radar, whether that's specific design tools, analytics tools. What's on your radar as far as digital design?
Yeah, I think as far as digital design, what we're seeing a lot of, and I don't know if anyone's familiar with the term design systems. This is not a platform of a design tool to create a design. There are many that are out there, like Sketch and Figma and InVision, and they allow designers to create the digital interface and experiences and manage that in a number of different ways. But what we're seeing is using those to create design systems. And so these are design patterns and modules that can be used across whether that's a website or a mobile app or some sort of other thing. And really that is I'd say it's not a growing trend. It's kind of already here. Like if you're going to continue to redesign and invest inside of digital technology, you ought to be thinking about creating design systems so that you can expedite the process of like, hey, we've got a list module of how we present X content. Okay, we're going to use that here and over there, right? And so we see a lot of that because it expedites the process to redesigning, designing, or just continuing to extend digital experiences. On the analytics, we get a little less involved, Matt, but I'll say I've been reading a lot about how there are a number of upstarts that are challenging Google Analytics, primarily just from a simplicity standpoint, right? And so whether that be around taking into greater consideration the privacy of tracking and managing the data around people, or just being able to tell the story about what in the heck is going on with how people are using our products and services. Simplicity is kind of where it's at right now.
Yeah, I can add a couple of things, Matt, in terms of research tools and things that people should maybe think about. If you're venturing into kind of basic interaction design and just trying to get that part down, there's a really great tool called Optimal Workshop. Actually, they offer a number of tools to do things like card sorting, if you're trying to get your navigation just right, and they also have a qualitative data entry tool that helps you then find themes and patterns. We do a lot of research using a web conferencing tool. We use Zoom, but you could use WebEx or anything else, but we found that Zoom works the best. And so we do a lot of remote user testing. Sometimes it's just half an hour where we've sent something out. We get online with someone and we kind of watch them go through it and listen to what they have to say about it. That's really quick and dirty usability research that anyone can do, right? So if you're not doing that, you should start doing some of that. And then there's other tools that are, for kind of bigger, more strategic projects. I just am finishing up a project with a tool called D as in David, D-Scout. And D-Scout is basically a diary study tool where you can follow people over a long period of time through an experience. I don't know how you would apply that to your market, but you can get some really interesting data out of that. And then lastly, there's a plethora of online testing tools like usertesting.com. There's so many other ways that you can start applying research, very, very kind of table stakes stuff to what you're doing to start to find where are you maybe missing the mark. And always assume that you're wrong, right? Listen to the folks who are using your tools to get their perspective, because oftentimes, I can't tell you how many times as a researcher I thought, well, I got this, and then I hear something like that is not at all how we were thinking about it. So I really encourage you to use some of those tools.
All right, great.
Any questions?
Thank you, guys.
I think we're good.
Okay. Well, great. I mean, we're happy to make available the slides. Matt, Roberta, if you've got them already, feel free to distribute. And we're always itching to hear from folks as they embark upon different challenges. If there are ways or thinking that we can be helpful, you've got our contact information, and please let us know.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So we are now going to move along onto our topic jam. We had a question come in, I believe it was last week, about switching ad servers. And, okay, we just lived through that pain at North Star. I feel like we're living through pain every day, but it's good. It's good pain. We were one of the questions that came in specifically was talking about moving from OAS, which 24/7 Real Media changed AppNexus, it's had a variety of names, over to DFP. So we thought we'd take a few minutes to talk about if anybody else also has just recently or can remember back to when they were migrating ad servers, any specific lessons learned, or we talk a little bit about what were you missing? Was there a specific knowledge gap you were missing in-house? And if Reggie's on the phone with us, Reggie Hudson's from North Star, our team, if you want to unmute yourself, *7. You could talk a little bit about DFP in general. I will tell you that from my perspective, the 50,000-foot level, I do believe it's important to make sure you're working with a vendor who can spend the time with you to not only understand your ad model and where you may have sponsorships, where you may have run a site, but how to set up your website and set up the ad server so that you have the ability to sell more. And what I mean by that is, we here typically when it comes to run a site ads, normally if you put them in the system and you give them 100% share of voice, not everybody can have 100% share of voice. So we were actually limiting ourselves on our own inventory. So there's definitely, I think, a knowledge gap sometimes that you might not have in-house that you really should make sure you either explore kind of bridging that gap with a consultant or with the vendor that you choose.
Yeah. Hi, Roberta. This is Justin. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought I would chime in on this topic on the ad server migrations because I've worked on those kind of projects many times over the years, and I will say that especially the process of moving specifically to GPT and DoubleClick for Publishers type platform where for me the real trick to nailing those projects, because I know exactly what you're talking about when you talk about like crippling your own inventory by setting it up a certain way. And I think for me the real trick to nailing that, at least when we rolled that out with a lot of brands, was really what you said, was inventorying everything first. And now whenever we do a new project, we're really careful to make sure the architecture of that website, the folders and the directories, the structure of how the developers decide to build it is really in line with the way that our ad serving team wants to track and serve those ads. And for us, it's become a science now. Like we basically create like this Excel spreadsheet for every site and project we do where it's almost like a site map, like an old school site map where we're breaking down the directories and pages and just kind of coordinating your S1, S2 values with your GPT tags. But for me, it's all about that point of inventorying the site, making sure your ad ops team knows the directories and the structure set up. And it's completely workable, though. I got to say, GPT is quite good. I've been pretty happy with them on a global level for large brands, for the last few years now, having moved away from some older DoubleClick and Checkmate type old school ad serving tools, and they're quite good, actually.
Yeah, I think Jerry, Reggie, do you want to chime in a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, great. So I actually agree with Justin. I think moving to GPT, DoubleClick, or Google Ad Manager, tagging structures, if that's the ad server that you choose, can certainly be beneficial. And to what Roberta said earlier, the knowledge gap is probably like the biggest thing. For those that are switching from, let's say, OAS to Google Ad Manager, I think it's important to first know that Google doesn't deal with just about anybody direct anymore. There's always a third party or intermediary in there. For us, it's a company called Operative. They're basically just a reseller of the platform, and they'll provide you with your customer service and just kind of helping you lay out that ad model. So to Roberta's point, it is important to kind of dig and get as much information as possible from that third-party reseller to understand your business model and what you're trying to achieve from your ad layout. I think
Great.
we probably need to think about migrations in two phases. One, and I guess this again is probably a little bit to Justin's point, is the tagging and taxonomy and structure. I've done this before where I viewed it as an opportunity. Working under a company like OAS, I think the tagging structure and the counting methodologies are a little bit different in terms of how they recognize certain impressions. So when you're starting to switch to a company that's much bigger, like a Google Ad Manager, there's definitely consideration for other factors, unique impressions, viewable impressions, fraud, IVT, things like that. It presents itself an opportunity for you to correct it then, as opposed to just kind of continuing with the same framework of an older ad server. So I think there, if you are considering a transition or a switch, I would probably sit down with your ad ops team, your development team, and make sure that they're lockstep with that third-party reseller so that you're actually mapping out what your objectives are and everyone is fully aware of that structure. And again, kind of going back to Roberta's point about just the knowledge share outside of the operations and development side of the business, I think it is important to relay that message to your sales leads as well, because sometimes that correlates. Your sales is either dictated or paired with how we're serving on the back end. So changing that mindset will definitely be important in terms of communication internally, just to make sure everyone is on the same page.
Yeah, I think the reseller note is right on the money too. We use a reseller too, a company called Outsourced Ad Ops, OAO, over in Brooklyn, and they've really become an extended arm of our ad ops team here in New York.
Yeah, for sure. There's a few of them out there. Operative, OAO, those are probably the two biggest ones in the industry right now.
Yeah.
But I think it's all like budget consideration in terms of who you go with.
Yeah. I would add too that really, really important, you need to really make sure you are documenting and reporting and sketching out your impressions by ad unit before you migrate, because there's a vast difference between filtering out bot activity between an OAS or a smaller ad server versus Google. So you can get caught a little bit in the crossfire when you start to migrate over and you actually then start to compare impressions. And if your sales team is going out and they're giving average impressions for certain sections of the site, and that's not even anywhere near where it used to be after your migration, then you didn't do your homework ahead of time. So really make sure you're kind of prepared and looking at that beforehand, because that could be a big miss later on. And there's not that there's a tremendous amount you can do about it, but you can at least start to be prepared and start to have those conversations. I find sometimes people don't want to actually go back to sales and say, hey, you know what, we're going to get great efficiency and we're going to do all these great new things, but I got to tell you, the more stringent bot traffic is really going to pull down your impressions a little bit. You need to be prepared for that conversation with your client. Like, nobody really wants to have that conversation, but you kind of have to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think the second part is considering how you're going to input all of your orders, right? You have, let's say, hundreds of orders and line items that need to be transferred from one ad server to the next. there should probably be two considerations. There's your regular manual setup where you're literally going to have someone going into both systems and making sure that all line items are paired. Or there's the automated approach where, on the back end, you're investing in an API or plug into, let's say, your CRM, and you're pushing that data automatically over. It depends on your company's preference and what you have available to you at the time. That can certainly be a long process depending on how many active orders you have. So something to certainly consider when thinking about migrating a server.
Yeah.
I'm interested, Justin, did you have OAO support you in that capacity?
No, I mean, they really were there more on the serving part of it. When it came to switching, they really weren't involved in much in that. But I think it's a really good point, as always, that's like a key point, and for people considering those projects, you might want to consider migrating ad servers when your campaigns are at a low end of year kind of thing. Doing that in a key, moment between Q1 and Q2 and you could have no room for error. Not the greatest time to go through those kind of ad serving points, because you guys brought up some good points of Roberta's point of sometimes the impressions aren't going to be an exact one-to-one based on bot traffic. There's a lot of variables in that equation, so don't expect it to be an equivalent number going from one-to-one. Expect a small discrepancy, right, of 5% or something, because you never know. But, timing is everything, and I think that's a good point that when you have active campaigns and you have to manually or move them or, rely on an API, those are really good points. But my recommendation would always be just do it when traffic is low, when your campaigns are at a low, and when, ideally you can pull that off in a manual way without making everyone crazy and double maintaining campaigns between two systems. But no, OAO did not help us with that process. I think they would have charged us for it if they did.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. And yeah, great point. The only other thing is, I would certainly connect your ad ops teams and your dev teams. If Google Ad Manager is the ad server of choice, they do a great job of documenting and kind of creating that learning experience or a knowledge base. They have what's called Publisher University, where literally you can go through every instance of working with tag structure, all the way to fraud and identification, right? So you have a database where you can kind of refer to. I would probably look at that prior to doing anything just to see if it does fully make sense to you, and it'll help save a lot of headaches down the line.
Right. Agreed.
You can also get certified through it. So your ad ops team can go through it and take tests and become certified ad operations.
Yep, our team did that. Yeah, our team at Strategic Guide did that, and the publisher tools are such a huge help.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good to know. All right, so that brings us to the top of the hour. If there's, I'll ask Matt if there's any questions out there. We can answer them on switching ad servers. Otherwise, we can talk a little bit about what's going on with Connectiv.
Folks, speak now or forever hold your peace on ad servers. Star 7 to unmute your line, or you can type it in. Going once, going twice. All right. So what's coming up over the next month with Connectiv? On February 27th, we have an in-person breakfast and learn in New York City on Media Math. This is with Steve Bookbinder, who's the principal with DM Training, which is a digital media sales training organization. Steve is an extremely impressive guy. He's an extremely entertaining guy. And the Media Math class is really geared toward getting people up to speed on emerging terminologies and how this really applies to a business. I would say this is probably for your more junior staffers, or this is for other people, not necessarily in the digital media department, but other people you're working with in your organization who may frustrate you with their lack of understanding. If that's the case, I certainly think that this breakfast and learn is something you may want to send their way. On February 28th, we've got a webinar on building a data product. Are you ready? This features Prescott Shuttles, who's the Vice President of Data at Randall Riley. Prescott has built data businesses at a couple different companies and really overseen the development and expansion of Randall Riley's business. So he's going to be talking about what you need to look at to determine whether or not you really have the opportunity to create a data product, and then what do you need to know from an organizational level about how to build that product. And coming up May 14th, May 16th, we have the Connectiv Executive Summit in Charleston. We're going to be sending out an agenda announcement later this afternoon, so certainly take a look at that. We think we've got a great lineup. We're doing some things differently. It's going to be a very rapid-fire program, a fun program, so certainly encourage you guys to check that out as well. And then finally, we're going to be looking at doing more face-to-face meetings for the Digital Media Council, the Audience Marketing Council, and others as well. Certainly appreciate you guys joining us on the phone today, but we do want to give you the opportunity to connect face-to-face with your peers and be able to engage in conversation. So we're looking at doing a DMC meeting in March in New York City. We'll be looking at expanding that to also Washington, D.C., and in Chicago later on in the year. And that's what we have today. I want to thank you guys for joining us. Roberta, great job as always. Also thank you to Jason and Roberta, to your peers, for joining the conversation today as well.
Great. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.